The crane stopped with 62.7 tons, hanging 12 feet above the dry dock floor. Steel cables held the maintenance frame over the submarine's open service bay, while condensation slid down the cabin glass in narrow silver lines. Petty Officer First Class Leona Pryce kept one hand near the deadman control and watched the eastern rail tremble beneath the load. Hold position. Below her, signal paddles froze in midair. Dock 14 remained filled with the hydraulic hum of the crane and the faint ticking of metal cooling in 4-degree air. Leona felt the first vibration through the soles of her boots, a soft pulse from the cabin deck, followed by a second, one sharper than the first. It was not cable recoil, engine chatter, or the ordinary settling of suspended steel. East rail moved. The evaluator beside her checked the alignment display. Green figure showed 0.3 of a mil, well inside the training tolerance. On the observation platform, Major Roland Kessler looked at his watch before looking at the suspended frame. The certification window had narrowed to 11 minutes. "The system says stable," he replied over the intercom. Leona eased pressure from the control and waited. A bead of water on the lower pane crawled sideways instead of downward when the hydraulic pack settled. The rail had shifted while carrying weight, then relaxed enough to leave the static sensors almost unchanged. 2.4 mils underload. A breath passed through one of the open microphones, the sound of someone deciding that the trainee had become an inconvenience. Kessler ordered the evaluator to record operator hesitation and instructed Leona to resume the traverse. Behind him, two instructors exchanged a brief look, not openly mocking, simply accustomed to trusting the approved display over a trainee's judgment. "Continue the exercise." Leona took a grease pencil from the console clip. Across the glass, she wrote East Rail, 2.4 miles, then marked the point where the paired vibration had returned through the cabin. Her hand moved once more, almost automatically, drawing two narrow curves around a single dot. The symbol took less than a second. Colonel Jonah Remick, standing apart from the training staff in a dark cold-weather coat, lowered his eyes to it. He had spent the morning observing a routine certification cycle without interrupting. Now his attention left the suspended frame and fixed on the small mark beside Leona's correction. "Who taught her that?" he asked. Kessler either did not hear or chose not to answer. He repeated the order to move, this time with the controlled impatience of a supervisor whose schedule had been challenged by someone assigned to a trainee seat. Leona looked down at the submarine and then along the eastern rail, disappearing beneath the crane carriage. The double vibration returned, stronger than before, and somewhere beneath the gray paint, metal shifted against metal. Before she touched the control again, Colonel Remick stepped toward the intercom because he knew the mark on the glass had never appeared in any training manual issued at Kepler Sound. Colonel Remick's hand had nearly reached the intercom when Kessler changed the channel. "Evaluator, assume control and complete the hold." The maintenance frame remained suspended while the secondary operator locked the traverse. Leona stepped away from the console, leaving the grease pencil correction visible on the glass as the cabin clock rolled from 6 hours, 41 minutes, and 58 seconds to 6 hours and 42 minutes. Outside, vapor collected along the crane rails in pale, horizontal bands. "Petty Officer Pryce, report to the floor." Kessler met her beside the Eastern Service stairs with a tablet already open to evaluation, file DD14, QC 118. He did not raise his voice or accuse her of incompetence. He entered 3 clinical phrases beneath her name: delayed compliance, over-reliance on non-instrument observation, reduced confidence under suspended load. Around them, technicians resumed ordinary movement, although several left one side of their hearing protection raised. "You stopped a certification lift on a reading the system did not produce," Kessler said. Leona glanced toward the carriage above them. The frame appeared steady, yet a faint tremor traveled through the steel handrail at irregular intervals. The system was calibrated without weight. Kessler tapped the approved figure on his display. 0.3 mil, the official reading is here. He reassigned her from the operator's seat to ground, signaling for the remainder of the qualification cycle. The decision sounded procedural, which made it more damaging than a public reprimand. A younger trainee named Dane Holt took her place in the cabin. Holt had completed 6 clean simulations, but had never moved a full maintenance frame over an occupied service bay. "You will observe," Kessler told Leona. "Perhaps that will help separate caution from obstruction." Leona accepted the signal paddles from Mara Ellison, the dock's civilian structural technician. Mara was compact, practical, and known for treating documents as descriptions that had to agree with the metal they represented. She glanced at the writing still visible above them. 2.4. Under load, Leona replied. Mara did not accept the conclusion without checking. She crouched beside anchor plate E17 and ran a gloved thumb across the white inspection stripe. From 3 feet away, the line appeared intact, but its lower edge vanished beneath a newer layer of gray paint. A narrow crescent of older yellow primer remained visible beside one bolt housing. This was touched up. Kessler answered without turning. Cosmetic maintenance. Log glass quarter. He ordered the floor cleared to the marked safety boundary, 26 feet from the suspended frame, then directed Holt to prepare for a second traverse after a systems check. Leona moved along the eastern barrier and placed 2 fingers against the steel, comparing the vibration there with what she had felt in the cabin. A repeating tremor arrived near 18 hertz, faded, then returned as a paired pulse whenever the hydraulic pack adjusted pressure. The pattern was real, but its source was not yet certain. It might have come from the carriage wheel, a cable drum, or the anchor plate beneath the paint. Above E17, a box-shaped maintenance camera faced the rail from a corroded wall bracket. Its inspection label had expired 14 months earlier, and a strand of cobweb crossed the lens hood. Mara followed Leona's attention. That camera has not been connected to the dock network since the upgrade. A mechanical shutter clicked inside the housing. One small red lamp flashed at 6 hours, 47 minutes, and 12 seconds, recording the rail just as the vibration passed through it again. At 6:53, the systems checked clear Dock 14 for a second traverse. The maintenance frame had been lowered on its staging blocks, inspected, and raised again with the same 62.7-ton load distributed across 4 suspension points. Dane Holt sat in the crane cabin, while Leona stood below the eastern rail with signal paddles clipped to her belt. "Dynamic test first," she said. Kessler reviewed evaluation file DD14, QC 118. The static check still showed 0.3 mil of deviation, bearing temperatures below 19 degrees Celsius, and no fault codes from the carriage monitors. To him, the figures closed the matter. The equipment has passed every required inspection. Leona indicated anchor plate E17 instead of the control screens. The gray paint across the inspection stripe was smoother than the surrounding surface, and the old yellow primer formed a narrow arc beside the rear bolt housing. When the hydraulic pack cycled, the barrier carried the same paired vibration she had felt earlier, hovering near 18 hertz before dissolving into background machinery. The rail shifts only when the load reaches that plate. Mara placed a portable vibration sensor against the barrier, but its adhesive base sat on painted steel rather than the structural member below. The reading fluctuated between normal dock noise and a brief spike too short to classify. She studied the display. "I can verify a pulse. I cannot verify the source." Kessler treated that uncertainty as an answer. He instructed Holt to begin the lift sequence at reduced travel speed and ordered Leona to remain outside the 26-foot boundary. He then added another line to her evaluation. Repeated challenge to certified data without verified origin. The wording altered the way the other trainees regarded her. She was no longer merely cautious. She had become the person delaying a qualification schedule built around submarine maintenance windows, crane access, and dock availability. "Operator, proceed on my mark." Before the carriage moved, Leona asked for one additional check. Suspend the load over the staging block for 30 seconds and compare the rail position under weight. The request required no shutdown and would have cost less than a minute. Kessler refused because it was not included in the approved sequence. We are not rewriting the certification plan around an unverified sensation. Leona did not claim to know more than she did. The vibration might still have originated in a wheel flange, the carriage assembly, or a worn seam. What concerned her was the timing. The paired pulse arrived 1.6 seconds after hydraulic pressure settled, then repeated only when the load line centered over E17. Machinery vibration usually traveled with the machinery. This pattern appeared to wait for weight. Above the anchor plate, the old maintenance camera clicked again at 6 hours, 55 minutes, and 34 seconds. Its red lamp flashed once, and a lens remained aimed at the lower edge of the rail where fresh paint covered the inspection stripe. Mara copied the timestamp onto her work card, although neither woman knew whether the camera stored usable images or merely cycled an empty mechanism. Holt eased the carriage forward. The first 12 feet passed cleanly, and the instructors began to relax. At 18 feet, the load remained level, the control display stayed green, and one evaluator lowered his clipboard. Then the leading wheel crossed the line above E17. Leona felt the first pulse through the concrete beneath her boots, the second through the barrier, and a third that had not been present during the earlier lift. "Stop the traverse," she said. Kessler looked at the fault-free display and raised his hand for Holt to continue. Holt obeyed Kessler's raised hand. The carriage advanced another 18 inches, and the third vibration climbed through Dock 14 with enough force to disturb the condensation beneath the eastern rail. A row of droplets fell together onto the concrete, tracing the path above anchor plate E17. At 6 hours, 55 minutes, and 41 seconds, the control display still showed green. "Maintain speed," Kessler ordered. The leading wheels crossed the plate, but the trailing assembly did not follow on the same axis. The maintenance frame rotated less than a degree, almost too little to see from the floor, while its lower corner drifted toward the equipment stands beside the submarine service bay. Two technicians stepped away from the safety boundary without waiting for instruction. Mara checked the portable sensor. The screen registered a brief rise to 2.9 millimeters per second before the signal collapsed into interference. Something transferred through the rail. Kessler looked toward the cabin instead of the plate. He believed the safest decision was to move the load beyond the suspected section rather than leave it suspended in place. "Continue through." Leona watched the cables above the frame. One remained nearly vertical. The opposite line leaned just enough to alter the reflection along its surface. The structure had not merely vibrated. Its reference had moved beneath the carriage. The rail shifted first. Kessler answered that no positional fault had been recorded. Holt advanced the control another fraction. A metallic knock traveled from E17, followed by the rough scrape of steel accepting weight outside its normal bearing surface. The frame turned again, and a maintenance cart inside the 26-foot boundary rolled several inches as the dock floor shuddered. Mara pulled the nearest technician behind a support column. No one was struck, but the clearance beside the service bay narrowed from 11 feet to less than 7. "Stop," Leona called. Holt released the control. The traverse halted, yet the frame continued rotating slowly under stored tension. Kessler ordered a corrective movement toward the western side. Leona rejected it from the angle of the load lines before Holt touched the lever. A western correction based on the static center line would force the carriage against the shifted rail and increase the uneven loading at E17. "Do not chase the display." Kessler stepped closer. "You are not the operator." Another pulse entered the floor, no longer near 18 hertz, but lower and heavier, separated into 3 distinct beats. The first traveled through the concrete. The second reached the barrier. The third arrived through the crane structure itself. Leona studied the carriage position, then followed the edge of the rail toward the old inspection stripe. The visible displacement remained small, but the timing gave her a usable boundary. The rail had settled at an angle matching the correction she had written on the cabin glass, 2.4 mils underload. The number was no longer an estimate. It represented the difference between where the system believed the crane stood and where the structure was actually supporting it. At 6 hours, 56 minutes, and 8 seconds, The frame's nearest corner passed inside 6 feet of the equipment stands. Holt's voice came over the speaker, controlled but strained. "I need a reference." Kessler began issuing another lateral correction. Leona reached for the ground control handset instead, because the next instruction could either stabilize the suspended weight or drive it farther across the fault. Leona keyed the ground control handset at 6 hours, 56 minutes, and 11 seconds. Hoci, freeze lateral input. Keep the load where it is. Kessler reached for the channel selector, but Colonel Remick placed one hand over the panel before he could cut the transmission. Above them, the maintenance frame continued turning at a fraction of a degree per second, its nearest corner now 5.8 feet from the equipment stands. The cables still carried the weight, but the eastern rail no longer carried the carriage where the display claimed it did. "Give him a reference," Remick said. Leona looked toward the auxiliary, staging cradle position 21 feet south of E-17. Reaching it required no further travel across the damaged plate, only a controlled descent along the frame's present axis. She could not prove the anchor had failed, and she could not promise the rail would remain stable. What she could read was the order in which vibration returned through the structure. Disregard the displayed centerline by 2.4 mils east. Hold the carriage. Lower on my count. Kessler stepped forward. That correction is not authorized. Another 3-beat sequence traveled through the dock. The first pulse entered the floor at 6 hours, 56 minutes, and 18 seconds. The second trembled through the barrier. The third reached the crane structure, weaker than before, but still distinct. Leona waited until the heavier transfer began to fade. Lower. Holt eased the load downward. The frame descended less than 3 feet before tension along the eastern cable changed and the rotation slowed. Mara watched the clearance beside the service bay widen by several inches. The portable sensor recorded a peak of 3.1 millimeters per second, then dropped below 1.4 as the suspended weight moved away from the unstable line. "Keep that rate," Leona said. She gave Holt only what he needed. Additional explanation would have competed with the sound traveling through the metal. At 8 feet above the cradle, the paired 18 Hz tremor returned, but the heavier third beat did not follow. Leona adjusted the reference by 0.5 mil, waded through one hydraulic cycle, and counted the final descent. The frame settled onto the auxiliary supports at 6 hours, 57 minutes, and 3 seconds. Its weight transferred with a low metallic groan, and the eastern rail stopped vibrating beneath the empty carriage. Holt released the controls, but remained in the cabin. Mara crossed the boundary only after the floor supervisor confirmed the suspended load condition had ended. The technicians returned immediately to measurements, cable angle photographs, and an inventory of tools displaced during the movement. Kessler reopened evaluation file DD14, QC 118. "Unauthorized intervention," he said, directing the words toward the tablet. Leona returned the handset to its bracket and walked to the cabin ladder. The grease pencil note remained on the glass. East rail, 2.4 miles. Beneath it sat the small symbol she had drawn earlier, 2 narrow curves enclosing a single dot. Remick climbed the first 3 steps and examined it from close range. "That is a black viper mark," he said. Mara turned from the sensor display. Kessler stopped typing. Remick did not ask Leona what the symbol meant. He already knew it identified movement that appeared only under load and warned operators not to recalibrate over the fault. He looked from anchor plate E-17 to the obsolete maintenance camera mounted above it. "Seal Dock 14, he ordered. "Preserve every local record from 6:30 forward." For the first time that morning, Kessler's attention left the delayed certification schedule and settled on what the old camera might have recorded long before Leona entered the cabin. Dock 14 was locked at 7:09, with the crane controls tagged, the auxiliary cradle photographed, and anchor plate E-17 placed behind a 20-foot exclusion boundary. Kessler objected to the shutdown in procedural terms, arguing that Remick had interrupted a qualification cycle before the equipment logs could be reviewed in context. He also entered a supplemental note claiming Leona's 2.4 mil correction had introduced the final oscillation. The intervention may have altered the evidence. Mara removed the maintenance camera from its wall bracket under the supervision of 2 safety technicians. The housing predated the dock network upgrade and contained no wireless transmitter, only a sealed memory cartridge and a mechanical trigger connected to rail vibration above a fixed threshold. Its inspection label had expired, but its internal clock remained accurate to within 4 seconds of the dock master clock. The cartridge contained 1,842 images spanning 11 months. Leona did not touch it. She remained outside the evidence table while Mara copied the files to 2 read-only drives and recorded the transfer under Infrastructure Review Number KSN, DD14-224. The earliest frames showed the white inspection stripe across E17 as one continuous line. By late winter, a gap no wider than 2 millimeters had appeared beside the rear bolt housing. 3 weeks later, temporary steel shims were visible beneath the rail seat. No corresponding repair order appeared in the maintenance database. That could have been emergency stabilization, Kessler said. Mara advanced to a frame stamped 2 hours, 18 minutes, and 44 seconds on March 6th. The image showed Kessler standing beside E17 with the former dock maintenance chief, both facing a temporary displacement gauge attached to the plate. A second image, taken 19 seconds later, captured the gauge before it was removed. The angle did not establish the full deviation, but it proved the plate had been monitored. On March 8th, Kessler signed certification entry DD14, SR 771, stating that no measurable structural movement had been observed during the quarter. Remick asked for the next sequence. In April, the original white stripe disappeared beneath gray paint. The yellow primer crescent Leona noticed became visible only after the new coating dried unevenly around the shifted bolt housing. By May, the camera recorded a recurring pattern. The stripes separated when the crane carried heavy loads, then nearly realigned after the carriage passed. Static inspection photographs taken later in each cycle showed little change. The defect concealed itself whenever the dock was measured at rest. At 6 hours, 55 minutes, and 34 seconds that morning, the camera captured the rail moving beneath Holt's Traverse. At 6 hours, 56 minutes, and 18 seconds, the image sequence showed the gap widening as the 3-beat vibration traveled through the structure. When Mara overlaid fixed reference marks from the first frame and the crisis frame, the displacement matched 2.4 mils within the camera's margin of error. Kessler shifted his argument. He said the shims had been installed without his technical knowledge and that his signature covered only the electronic calibration report. Mara opened the certification packet. Attached to it was a scanned approval bearing Kessler's initials beside the words Temporary Load-Bearing Adjustment. Review after 30 cycles. Dock 14 had completed 87 cycles since that approval. Leona studied the screen only long enough to understand what the sequence established. She had detected the movement, but the camera documented its history. Remick ordered every certification signed after cycle 30 placed under review. Kessler closed his tablet, recognizing that the central question was no longer why Leona had stopped one exercise, but why he had authorized 57 additional lifts after the temporary adjustment expired. The Dock Infrastructure Safety Board convened at 8:20 the following morning in Review Chamber C, one level above the sealed maintenance galleries. 5 members sat behind a steel table: a structural engineer, a crane certification officer, a civilian safety auditor, a command legal advisor, and Colonel Jonah Remick. Major Roland Kessler occupied the witness position with evaluation file DD14, QC 118 open before him. Leona sat 12 feet away beside Mara Ellison without access to the board's controls or evidence screens. Proceed with the sequence. Mara presented the maintenance camera images in chronological order, beginning with the intact inspection stripe and ending with the displacement recorded at 6 hours, 56 minutes, and 18 seconds. She matched each frame to crane cycle records, bearing temperature logs, and the temporary adjustment approval Kessler had initialed 11 months earlier. The board verified that the camera clock differed from the dockmaster clock by 4.2 seconds, a variance too small to alter the sequence. Frame 1611 showed the first visible separation under a 48-ton load. Frame 1794 showed the same plate returning almost to alignment after unloading. Frame 1842 captured the movement beneath the 62.7-ton training frame. Static calibration concealed the defect, the structural engineer said. Kessler argued that temporary shims were common and that no electronic monitor had exceeded its programmed threshold before the exercise. He described his decisions as schedule management based on certified information. The legal advisor asked why review was required after 30 cycles but had not occurred by cycle 87. Kessler replied that maintenance responsibility belonged to the former dock chief. Mara displayed the scanned approval again. Beneath Kessler's initials was a handwritten instruction authorizing continued operation pending replacement hardware. The replacement requisition, KSN, PR 4096, had been canceled 6 days later from Kessler's administrative account. No explanation accompanied the cancellation. That was a readiness decision, Kessler said, not concealment. The board then examined the evaluation notes he entered during the incident. His first entry labeled Leona's halt as operator hesitation at 6:43. His supplemental entry accused her correction of producing the final oscillation, although the camera recorded progressive movement before she touched the ground control handset. The timestamps placed the third vibration at least 23 seconds before her intervention. Kessler's explanation narrowed with each document. He had not sabotaged the crane or invented the structural defect. He had treated a known temporary adjustment as permanent because closing Dock 14 would reduce the base's readiness rating and expose the earlier certification he had approved. The board suspended his authority to certify heavy lift equipment, removed him from supervisory control of the dock, and referred his decisions for command responsibility review. No final punishment was announced. That process would continue through official channels. Leona was called last. She stated that she had detected movement under load, but could not initially determine whether it came from the carriage, wheel assembly, or anchor plate. She explained only that the 3-beat pattern separated structural transfer from ordinary machinery vibration. Remick then placed an old structural response certification index on the evidence screen. One line listed Pryce. Leona, beneath the designation, turned 6 and displayed the same 2 curved lines around a central point. Black Viper was not a combat formation, he said. It was a response protocol for equipment that failed only while carrying weight. He offered no stories about Leona's former assignments. He confirmed only that she had once been certified to recognize the category of fault Dock 14 had concealed. At 10:14, the board amended its preliminary finding. The lift had not been disrupted by trainee uncertainty. It had been stopped after a qualified operator detected unrecorded structural movement. The final Dock 14 report was issued 9 days later under Infrastructure Case KSN DD 14-224. Major Roland Kessler's heavy lift certification authority was revoked pending command review, and his reassignment order removed him from supervisory duties involving structural safety, equipment acceptance, and readiness reporting. The document did not accuse him of sabotage or assign motives the evidence could not establish. It stated that he had knowingly extended a temporary adjustment beyond its 30-cycle limit, canceled replacement requisition KSN, PAR 4096, and continued operations through cycle 87 without the required inspection. His defense, that the electronic monitors remained within programmed limits, was preserved beside the maintenance images demonstrating why those limits had failed. Dock 14 remained closed for 26 days. The eastern rail seat was removed, anchor plate E17 was replaced, and the gray paint was stripped away until the original inspection stripe and older yellow primer disappeared with the damaged steel. When the crane returned to service, the rebuilt section registered less than 0.2 mil of movement under its full certification load. Leona Pryce attended none of the command meetings that followed. She completed her operator qualification on the repaired crane, with Mara Ellison monitoring from the floor and Dane Holt in the secondary seat. At 6:42, the same minute the first lift had been stopped, Mara ordered a 30-second loaded hold before the carriage crossed the replacement plate. No one challenged the additional check. The vibration trace remained steady. The rail held its reference, and a maintenance frame passed above the service bay without drifting from center. Leona signed the qualification sheet in the space marked operator and returned the grease pencil to its clip. Colonel Jonah Remick waited beside the cabin ladder with the final report folded under one arm. The first draft had described the incident as a training interruption caused by operator uncertainty. The approved version contained one corrected sentence. Petty Officer First Class Leona Pryce halted the lift after identifying structural movement measured at 2.4 mils under load. Her former designation, Turn 6, did not appear. Neither did the name Black Viper. Remick had removed both from the public section of the report because neither was necessary to establish what happened. The record only needs what can be proved, he said. Leona looked through the cabin glass toward the repaired eastern rail. The symbol she had drawn was gone, cleaned away with the old markings, but a photograph of it remained inside the sealed technical appendix. Two curved lines around one central point. The Black Viper mark. Remick had recognized it before anyone else understood what the rail was doing, and the amended record now explained why her correction had mattered. Leona closed the report without requesting another line, another title, or another acknowledgement. "That is enough," she said. Then she returned to the controls while Dock 14 resumed its measured mechanical rhythm below. If quiet discipline means more to you than loud glory, please like and subscribe. This story is a fictional military narrative created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental.